Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're going deep on something I think we all can relate to. Social media influencers.
You mean those folks we follow online?
Exactly. But we're not just chatting about who's trending. We're getting into the nitty-gritty of how those influencers you follow can actually influence what you buy.
Ah, the psychology of persuasion. Always fascinating.
Right. And we're not just speculating here. We've got some seriously in-depth research to guide us.
Ah, lay it on me.
2 academic papers, not just blog posts or anything. These researchers went all out using statistical modeling, machine learning algorithms.
Wow, heavy hitters. Sounds like they're taking this seriously.
No kidding. And you know that feeling you get with some influencers? Like you almost know them personally.
Yeah, like we're buddies, even though we've never met.
That's called a parasocial relationship. And it's at the heart of what we're diving into today.
Parasocial relationships, I've heard the term. But how do those actually make people open their wallets?
That's the million-dollar question, right? These studies looked at how those relationships actually drive people to buy things.
So, if I feel like I'm best friends with an influencer, I'm more likely to buy the stuff they recommend. Makes sense, but how does it work?
Well, they dug into some specific ways those relationships work. For example, how well the influencer matches the brand they're promoting.
Ah, so it's not just about being popular, but actually fitting the product.
You got it. And get this. They even looked at how followers feel a kind of good envy towards the influencers.
Good envy. Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
Think about it. When you see someone with something you'd love to have, but it motivates you instead of making you feel bad.
Okay, I'm starting to see where you're going with this. Like, I want that awesome lifestyle too, and maybe this product will get me closer.
Bingo. But here's the thing. How do you actually measure something as complex as envy or a parasocial bond? It's not exactly like taking your temperature.
You're telling me it's all very touchy-feely.
Exactly. So these researchers use surveys, of course, but then they went a step further. They used some really advanced statistical methods to see how all these different factors actually relate to each other.
So, like, how much you trust an influencer is linked to how likely you are to buy something they recommend.
That's just the tip of the iceberg. They even use machine learning to try and predict how likely people are to buy something based on their relationship with an influencer.
Whoa, hold on. So they're using artificial intelligence to figure out our shopping habit.
You got it. And the crazy part is, these models they built were surprisingly accurate in predicting actual buying behavior.
Okay, color me impressed. This is starting to sound less like psychology and more like science fiction.
I know, right? But it just shows how data science is really changing the game when it comes to understanding what drives us to buy.
All right, you've piqued my curiosity. Let's dive into the details. What can you tell me about the first study?
Well, the first study focused on what they call brand influencer fit. Basically, it's all about how well the influencer matches the brand they're promoting.
Okay, that makes sense. Like a fitness guru promoting workout gear, that seems like a natural fit.
Exactly. But if that same fitness influencer starts pushing fast food...
Yeah, that would raise a few eyebrows.
Right. So they surveyed a bunch of young adults on all the major platforms, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, you name it. They had them rate how much they agreed with statements like, this influencer has the skills and knowledge relevant to the brand.
So they were basically trying to figure out how authentic the endorsement felt.
Exactly. And they found that the more influential the person is,
the more likely people are to buy what they're selling.
You'd think so, right? But here's the catch. It's not that straightforward. It turns out that influence alone isn't enough. That effect is even stronger when you have a strong parasocial relationship with the influencer and you believe they genuinely fit with the brand.
Aha, so it's not just about being famous. It's about that connection and whether the endorsement feels real.
Precisely. People are savvy these days, you know. They can sniff out a fake endorsement from a mile away. They want to see a genuine connection between the person and the product.
Authenticity is key, huh?
Absolutely. Okay, so that's the lowdown on the first study. Ready to move on to the second.
Hit me with it. What did they discover in the second study?
This one focused on something called benign envy. That feeling we talked about earlier where you admire what someone has and it motivates you.
Right, the good kind of envy. Sounds interesting. How did that play out in their research?
Well, get this. They found that the more you admire an influencer, the more likely you are to experience that benign envy towards them.
Makes sense. We want what those we admire have, right?
Exactly. And the kicker is that envy, combined with a strong parasocial relationship, can make you really want to buy things they use or recommend.
So it's not just about wanting that specific item. It's about wanting the whole lifestyle or image that goes with it. Precisely. The more you see yourself in that influencer, the more likely you are to buy things that you think will help you achieve a similar lifestyle. It's almost like you're buying into their image.
Now, that's fascinating. And they actually found that the strength of this envy depends on what you're envious of, right? Like if it's their possessions, their achievements, or something else.
Spot on. They looked at all those categories, and what they found was pretty surprising.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. What was so surprising?
Benign envy was strongest when it was focused on the influencer's personal qualities.
Wait, so it's not about the fancy car or the glamorous vacations. It's about their personality.
You got it.
Yeah.
It seems like people are most drawn to those inner qualities, the things that make someone unique and appealing. It's like we're hoping that by buying the same products, we can somehow get a little piece of that personality too.
Okay, that is seriously interesting. But let's be real for a sec. We've got these two studies, both using some pretty complex methods. How do we know if this actually translates to real life?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Can these fancy models actually predict what we're going to buy?
Exactly. Well, they tested that too. They actually looked at how well those models could predict purchasing behavior, and the results were
Drum roll, please.
pretty impressive.
Yeah.
They were surprisingly accurate, especially the model that included benign envy.
So it's not just a bunch of theories, it's something marketers can actually use.
Yep. It really highlights the power of data science in understanding
Yeah.
and potentially even influencing our choices.
That's a little bit scary, don't you think? Knowing our shopping habits can be predicted with such accuracy.
It definitely raises some ethical questions about how this knowledge is used. And it makes you wonder about the future of influencer marketing. I mean, with AI and machine learning becoming more and more advanced, will we become even more susceptible to this kind of influence?
Now, that's a thought-provoking question, and one we should probably discuss more. But before we dive into that rabbit hole, I think it's important to step back and think about the big picture. What does all this mean for us as individuals and for society as a whole? So remember how we were talking about those super influential social media personalities? Well, the first study really broke down what makes them so powerful.
You mean besides just having millions of followers, there's got to be more to it than that, right?
Exactly. They call it source influence, and it's not just about popularity.
So what is it then? What makes someone a powerful influencer? Till the T.
They actually identified 4 key elements: expertise, trustworthiness, attractiveness, and similarity.
Okay, those make sense. I mean, if someone seems like they really know what they're talking about, I'd probably trust their recommendations more. And if I feel like we have things in common, well, maybe their opinion matters even more to me.
You're getting it. It's like finding someone who speaks your language. And they found that when you combine those 4 elements, it significantly increases the chances that you'll buy something that influencer recommends.
So it's kind of like a recipe for influence, a dash of expertise, a sprinkle of similarity.
You could say that, but here's where it gets even more interesting. They found that the impact of those 4 factors is even stronger when it's combined with a strong parasocial relationship.
Ah, so it's not just about being knowledgeable or attractive. It's about how those qualities come across when you feel like you actually know the person. That makes a lot of sense.
It's like that feeling of connection really amplifies everything else. And of those 4 elements, they found that trustworthiness was the most important one for actually driving those purchases.
Well, yeah, if you don't trust someone, why would you care what they're recommending?
Right. It's all about believability. People want to feel like the influencer is being genuine, that they're not just trying to make a quick buck. Expertise plays a big role too, especially if it's relevant to the product they're promoting.
Like, if a tech expert starts trying to tell me about the best new mascara, I'm probably going to be a little less convinced.
Exactly. You want someone whose knowledge actually lines up with what they're talking about. Now, attractiveness and similarity, those were still important, but they didn't have as direct an impact on those buying decisions as trust and expertise.
So maybe those are more about whether someone decides to follow an influencer in the first place. But once you're following, then trust and expertise really seal the deal.
That's a great point. It's like those factors might initially grab your attention, but in the end, it's all about whether you buy what they're selling. Now, the second study, the one that dug into benign envy, that took a slightly different approach.
Right, benign envy, the good kind, where you admire what someone has, and it actually motivates you, not just makes you feel bad. Curious to hear more about that.
Well, they discovered that this kind of envy can be a huge driver of buying behavior, especially when it comes from influencers you have that parasocial connection with.
So it's more than just, oh, I want that cool gadget. It's about wanting the whole lifestyle or image that comes with it. I can totally see that.
Absolutely. The more you see yourself in that influencer, the more likely you are to buy things that you think will get you closer to their lifestyle. It's like trying to capture a little bit of that magic.
And they actually found that the strength of this envy depends on what you're envious of, right? Like, is it about what they own, what they've accomplished, or something else entirely?
Exactly. And they looked at all of those different categories, and what they found was pretty fascinating.
Okay, lay it on me. What did they discover?
Benign envy was strongest when it was focused on the influencer's personal qualities.
Hold up, so it's not about the fancy car or the amazing job. It's about their personality.
Believe it or not, that's what the data shows. It's like we're drawn to those inner qualities, their confidence, their charisma, their sense of humor, those things that make them so unique and appealing.
It's almost like we hope that by buying the same products, we can somehow absorb a little bit of their personality too.
That's a really interesting way to put it. It's like we're trying to buy into their essence.
So we've got these two studies, both pointing to different ways that parasocial relationships can really nudge us toward buying things. But they also use some pretty complex research methods. How do we know if all this actually applies to real life?
You mean, can these fancy models really predict what we're going to buy? That's a great question.
Exactly. Because it's one thing to have a theory, it's another to see it play out in the real world. So did they actually test that?
They did. They actually looked at how well those models could predict purchasing behavior. And get this, the results were impressive. They were surprisingly accurate, especially the model that included benign envy.
Oh, so this isn't just some abstract academic concept. It's something that marketers could actually use to understand and, let's be honest, probably influence our choices.
That's right. And that raises a whole bunch of ethical questions, doesn't it? I mean, if someone can predict my shopping habits that accurately, well, it makes you think twice about how that information could be used.
Definitely. It's almost like a glimpse into the future of influencer marketing. I mean, imagine what happens as AI and machine learning get even more sophisticated. Will we become even more susceptible to this kind of influence?
That's a great point, and maybe a conversation for another time. But before we spiral down that rabbit hole, I think it's important to zoom out for a minute and consider the big picture. What does all of this mean for us as individuals? And for society as a whole? I mean, are we really that easily influenced? It's a big question, isn't it? Makes you wonder about the line between being informed and being, well, manipulated.
Totally. And it all comes back to that trust factor we keep talking about, those parasocial bonds we form with these influencers.
They're powerful, that's for sure. The more we feel like we know them, the more we tend to believe what they say, even when it comes to products.
Right. It's like that trust we might have for a close friend somehow gets transferred to these online personalities, even though, well, we've never actually met them.
It's funny how our brains work, isn't it? We extend those feelings of trust, even when it's not really a two-way street.
Which is exactly why media literacy is so crucial these days. We need to be aware of how these mechanisms of influence work so we can make more informed choices, especially when it comes to what we buy.
Couldn't agree more. We can't just blindly accept everything we see online. We need to develop those critical thinking skills, question those endorsements, think for ourselves.
It's not about assuming that every influencer is out to trick us. It's about understanding that even the most genuine seeming recommendations are often part of a larger marketing strategy.
Exactly. It's like knowing the game is being played helps you be a smarter player. Now, speaking of marketing, these studies actually offer some really valuable insights for brands.
Oh, so there's something in this research for the marketers too.
Definitely. If they're willing to listen.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of the key takeaways for brands who want to use influencer marketing effectively and ethically, of course?
Well, for starters, it really reinforces just how important it is to choose the right influencer for your brand. It's not just about finding someone with a zillion followers.
Right. It's got to be more than just popularity.
Exactly. It's about finding someone whose values, whose expertise, whose audience really aligns with the brand's message. It needs to be a good fit.
So it goes back to that brand influencer fit we talked about earlier, right? Making sure that partnership feels genuine and believable to the audience.
Precisely. And you know what else they found? Brands should really focus on building those long-term relationships with influencers, not just doing those one-off campaigns.
Because the longer that relationship goes on, the stronger that parasocial bond becomes.
Yeah,
and
the more influential they become. You got it.
It's like that trust builds over time, right?
Exactly. Consumers are way more likely to trust recommendations from someone they've been following for a while. An influencer whose opinions they've come to value, whose life they feel invested in.
And it probably plays into that whole benign envy thing too, right? If followers are consistently seeing this influencer's lifestyle, those aspirational qualities, it can make them want the products associated with it even more.
That's a great point. It's like painting a picture of a lifestyle and then offering the key to unlock it. And speaking of painting a picture, another big takeaway for marketers is the power of storytelling.
Storytelling. Seems like that's the buzzword everyone's throwing around these days.
Yes, but there's a reason for that. These studies suggest that the most effective influencer campaigns are the ones that actually tell a compelling story, one that really resonates with the audience and deepens that connection with the influencer.
So it's not just about showing someone using the product, it's about weaving that product into a larger narrative, something that speaks to the follower's own goals, values, challenges.
You nailed it. For example, instead of just having an influencer post a pic of themselves using a new face cream, a more effective approach might be to create a whole video series about their skincare journey, showing how that product fits into their routine and highlighting the results.
Right. That feels a lot more engaging and relatable than just a static photo.
Exactly. It gives those viewers a chance to connect with the influencer on a deeper level and maybe even feel inspired to try that product themselves. Now, one final takeaway for those marketers out there, and this is a big one, it's the importance of transparency.
Transparency. What do you mean by that?
Well, as consumers become more media savvy, they're getting a lot more skeptical of influencer marketing. They want to know if someone's being paid to promote something, and they really value honesty and authenticity.
So it's about being upfront about any sponsorships or financial incentives involved. No more hiding the fact that it's an ad.
You got it. And it might seem counterintuitive, but being open about those sponsorships can actually build trust with consumers.
It's kind of like acknowledging the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, we're not trying to trick you. We believe in this product and we think you will too.
Exactly. It shows that you respect the consumer and you're acknowledging that they understand how this whole influencer marketing thing works. Now, we've talked a lot about what this means for marketers, but zooming out a bit, what does it all mean for society as a whole?
That's the big question, isn't it? It feels like these studies raise some pretty important points about how social influence is changing and the impact these parasocial relationships might be having on our values, our beliefs, maybe even our sense of self.
Especially in a world where we're constantly bombarded with these perfectly curated images and messages on social media, it's easy to start comparing ourselves to others and, well, feeling like we don't measure up.
It makes me think about what we touched on earlier about the potential downsides of these parasocial relationships, how they can sometimes negatively impact body image and self-esteem, especially for younger folks.
Yeah, that's something we really need to be mindful of. We have to promote media literacy, encourage critical thinking, help people develop healthy self-esteem, especially for those who are growing up in this hyper-connected world.
It's about finding that balance, right? Being able to enjoy the entertainment and inspiration that social media and influencers can offer, but also keeping a healthy perspective, not letting their influence dictate our values or how we feel about ourselves.
That's well said.
Well, Deep Divers, that's all the time we have for today's Deep Dive. I don't know about you, but I'm walking away feeling a lot more informed and maybe just a little bit more cautious about the power of social media influence.
Yeah.
It's definitely something to think about as we navigate this crazy online world.
Absolutely. Food for thought. Thanks for joining us.